Right. Hello everybody, welcome to today's discussion about business in the UAE. For those that don't know me, I'm Felice Hurst, MD of Hanson Search. So I want to say good morning to everybody in the UK and Europe, and good afternoon to everybody over here in the Middle East. Delighted to be seeing on the panel today. I've got Alice in the UK, Roberto and Ross who are in the Middle East, and I'm actually in Istanbul. So we are a very much global platform today. So to set the agenda for the conversation, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping first. We're looking to run this webinar for about an hour. It will be recorded and we will be sending out an overview and a recording after the event. I'll start off by introducing you to the panel and then the conversations around their experiences of business here in the UAE. Please do try to interact throughout the conversations and submit any questions you may have in the chat box, and I'll try my best to cover as many questions as possible throughout the conversation. So start with introducing the panel. We shall go with Ross first. Ross has been in the UAE since 2009. We've known each other for about 7 years now. I remember the first time meeting him actually at a panel event. He relocated here as partner of EY and was their Chief Digital Innovation Officer, covering the Middle East and Africa, where he led the digital and innovation agenda, working closely with the highest levels of governments, organisations and multinationals to define and deploy their strategic initiatives. He then moved on to be Chief Digital Officer across GEM's Global Education and the Varkey Group, where he led and set up a number of vehicles to invest, build and scale innovative new digital technologies and business models in order to disrupt and enrich the provision of education of children across the planet. Ross has been CEO of the Collective now for almost 3 years. It's the region's largest independent digital consultancy, and the group consists of Traffic Digital, Greenlight Lab and Tribal Scale. He was a member of Dubai's 10X judging panel and is a regular media and conference contributor with specialties listing just a few: digital strategy, transformation, investments, M&A, business incubation, startups and scale-ups. Then on to Roberto. So Roberto has been, over the last 20 years, working with the likes of Microsoft and Google. Roberto's passion lies in innovation, startups and people. He has bridged the gap between corporates and startups across more than 20 countries, helping them develop real solutions that solve real-world problems. Roberto relocated here with Google in 2015 as regional head of emerging markets, where he successfully grew the business year on year. In 2019, he joined Microsoft as MD of Microsoft for Startups. So in his current role, Roberto is building Microsoft's new division from scratch in the region, which is spearheading its expansion and innovation strategy with a vision to foster a collaborative startup ecosystem to create a better, brighter future for people around the world, connecting the dots between startups, government agencies and private sector organisations. Roberto helps organisations adapt their innovative mindset and leverage the technology and nimbleness that startups provide. Last but not least, we have Alice Whiteman, our founder and CEO of Hanson Search, and also the founder and CEO of The Work Crowd, a true entrepreneur and innovator in her own right. Alice saw a problem and decided to find a way to rectify it, so The Work Crowd was launched in 2015. It's a global platform that connects businesses with the talent they need while helping people find work that works for them. Today, that vision has become a reality and it is now a global platform. Its sights are set on changing work for the better everywhere and is now here in the UAE. In fact, almost a quarter of the members, of which there are 7,000, are now based in Europe and the Middle East, with more joining every day. The Work Crowd believe that great work is about what you do and not where you do it, and it seems that they're not alone in that thought. So today's conversation is about the UAE being a dynamic region replete with business opportunities, political and social diversity, and multicultural complexities, which is now making it one of the most rapidly growing enterprise hubs in the world. With an intent to grow further, the UAE leaders have brought a number of economic reforms and administrative policies to attract capital and business from across the globe. Being strategically located in a junction between Europe, Africa and the Far East, the UAE is an ideally located hub in which to conduct business. An astonishing 95% of all enterprises in the UAE are startups and SMEs. setting the Emirates apart from other startup hotspots. This demonstrates the entrepreneurial nature of the UAE economy and the ready-made client pool of SMEs and fast-growing tech leaders. It's little wonder then that according to a recent study, the UAE was ranked 4th out of 57 countries behind Hong Kong, the US and South Korea as the 10 best countries in the world to freelance in. So in the wake of COVID-19, many companies are looking for more accessible, flexible, qualified pool of talent to tap into. Therefore, freelancers are becoming an ever-attractive option for both short and long-term contracts. Following on from many new initiatives of the government for it to be ease of business or the recent launching of freelance visas, even in yesterday's news, there was a new initiative of multi-entry visas for tourists and the continuing of the remote working visas. It's never has the UAE looked to be such an attractive option for startups, SMEs and the freelancers. As quoted by Roberto only last week, by expanding into the UAE, Microsoft is expecting to tap into $27 billion in revenue. And this is just in cloud-based technology alone, which in turn will be creating around 69,000 jobs in the region. These are big numbers from a relatively small economy of just under 10 million residents. It just highlights the growth in the startup economy and how the UAE is being viewed as a global platform. So now on to discussions with you. I wanted to start off really talking about business in the UAE and the emerging markets, ease of business on some of the initiatives that have come through, which is one I think I'll go to Roberto for, startup economy and the gig and digital nomads, and then there's some of the challenges afoot. So I wanted to start off first with Ross. I think Ross, coming from your EY, government initiatives and all of your regional experience, it would be really good to have a little bit of an overview from you on how you've seen the economy in the last few years since you've been here, the changes, some of the impacts maybe that as we're now coming out of COVID, and where you're going to be hoping to see these growths moving forward.
Sure, thank you, Felice, and a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. So yeah, I think you make an incredibly pertinent point around the changing dynamic that we're seeing in the UAE at the moment. One of the biggest challenges I think that businesses are finding, and certainly one that we are, is every project requires very specific bits of talent, and in this world of digital that we now live in, project teams they're not homogenous in nature. Having predefined groups of people to answer predefined problems is not really where the exam question is for a lot of our clients. So there's been huge changes, as you say, from the government to try and create a more flexible environment to enable businesses to be able to respond more accurately to the needs of what the market is looking for. The challenge obviously is that, this is a place that people live and work, that requires a visa, and that requires therefore there to be some permanence around that. So having that flexible contingent workforce is, whilst it might be preferable to have everyone in-house, it's neither realistic logistically or commercially for a lot of businesses to do that. So I think something that we've seen over the last few years is moves from both the big multinationals, of which I used to be part, and now in more of an SME business where we have 170 people, is trying to find that balance to be able to provide the right talent at the right time to our clients. And we talk really quite passionately about being an ecosystem rather than an ecosystem. So one of the things, and Roberto is on the call from our friends at Microsoft, we're finding very much now that there are very few projects that we go into where we think that we've got the right answer ourselves. So teaming up with others who historically may have been viewed as competitors or indeed working in a different space is a very natural way of doing business now. I was with the team at Microsoft this morning on something else. We have collaborations that we have with the big multinationals to help them deliver the last mile of some projects as well. But I think that for me has been the biggest change, Felice, in the market, is that there is an understanding both from the government and from private enterprise that there needs to be a much more flexible approach to be able to answer these problems. I think COVID has exacerbated that issue, where now there's an understanding that, you know, whether that work is being delivered from Karama or Karachi is almost inconsequential. You know, we're all sat behind screens now. I think one of the big challenges that perhaps we can come on to further in the discussion is how we retain the injection of humanity into the work that we do. But I think from my perspective, that's probably the biggest area where we've seen such a structural change around how we support projects effectively.
Great. Now, Roberto, so your role now with Microsoft is obviously absolutely focused on the startup economy, of which, you know, the figure I mentioned before, 95% SME and startup. So in the last 12 months since you've launched over here, where have you seen the challenges? Where have you seen the growth? What's your overview of the market in, you know, a few minutes, 5 minutes? That's what I'll allow you to speak.
Okay, thank you so much, Felice. Look, yeah, the last 12 months have been really intense because, as I was also saying, it's not just about a single entity trying to develop, you know, an ecosystem. It takes, you know, partnerships. It takes bridging the gaps, connecting the dots across different players to make things happen, especially tapping into an early stage ecosystem. So the good news is, first of all, there are a few elements that I would highlight. One is definitely the fact that government here, and most of the investment in startups are government-led in this region. Government here is very supportive and open to change, and there is a strong leadership behind looking, you know, longer term on what needs to be done to develop a stronger ecosystem here, right? So government here is, I would say, very focused on diversifying economy from oil to knowledge-based. And this drives a lot of the initiatives that we have seen happening. You mentioned a few when it comes to ease of doing business, when it comes to visa, not only attracting, but also retaining people and so on and so forth. Had the chance to meet with the Minister of Economy here in the UAE. And I really love the way, you know, he started his conversation talking about the fact that they really want to make the UAE for people here a place that you would consider home. And they know that maybe today you wouldn't consider UAE as your home because of, you know, you have a temporary visa, or you have a visa and you are not a citizen, and so on and so forth. But you see, they already started rolling out a number of initiatives to make life easier and to make people feel part of something bigger. And the other thing is a strong leadership. The leadership that comes from government here is a leadership of thinking long term. Now, I'm looking at the broader region, not just the UAE. And, you know, the UAE wants to be a regional hub, right? Because if you look at the regulations, all the initiatives that the government is doing, is just leading the way for the broader region to follow, and other governments in proximity countries, they are looking to follow the lead of the UAE, which is great. Think about a country like Pakistan, 200 million people, and it's still a cash-based country, and there is opportunity, you know, at the moment that the country started a digitization process, and it's still underserved, so there is a huge opportunity, right? Think about a number of countries around that have 80% of the population that is still unbanked. So financial inclusion, financial literacy is a huge thing that, you know, can be fostered and can be tackled with a number of initiatives from starting from the UAE, but tackling the whole Middle East and Africa region. The other thing is the maturity of the ecosystem is improving. So we have seen that across different industry, different dimensions. So the maturity of the startups that get founded and launched from the UAE is getting to a different level, still not where it could be, but the trend seems to be positive, not just in terms of, again, number of deals or funding, which is trending positive, but also the maturity of the solutions and what kind of problems the startups are trying to tackle. So definitely this show that it's definitely possible to build businesses from here, as long as the mindset goes with ones of focusing on real problems and building on partnerships. I loved what Ross mentioned before in terms of partnership. Like I have this quote from Satya Nadella that he basically said that you don't join Microsoft to be cool, but to make someone else cool, right? And that's the essence of partnership is you build on top of each other. And what's cool is Microsoft is doing this now with players that used to be fierce competitors a few years back. But this is how you develop the ecosystem. So one thing that the ecosystem needs more is local and global connectedness, because we need the different constituents, the different players to really come together and instead of fragmenting initiatives into very small pieces, just build something all together to make to increase the chances of having a larger impact, because the numbers and the evidence show that it's UAE is a great place today from where you can look at innovation, from where you can build on. You mentioned Microsoft investment before, Felice. Those numbers are incredible, right? So the investment, so on the Microsoft side, the investment to build the data centers only is about a couple of $1 billion, which is a huge investment into this region. But look at the economic growth and the social impact that can generate in terms of not just the billions of revenues from cloud, but also in terms of jobs created, right? So 69,000 of which probably 17,000 would be IT, specialized jobs is pretty amazing for this region, considering that the countries around are about to start a process of digitization again. And so there are huge opportunity in underserved markets that, startups and solutions building from here can tap into in the next years.
Really is fascinating figures, and only really identifies why, one of the biggest issues Alice and I will always come up with our clients. It's always about talent, which is where this whole concept of the work crowd has come. So Alice, let's be good to hear from you a bit of your overview of the gig and the freelancer in the international markets, and then on why it's now you're bringing the work crowd here.
Great, well, thank you, Felice. It's been really interesting listening to what Roberto and Ross has said. My background's obviously in talent. I've got 20 years in talent, so taking from a slightly different perspective. But I've launched a traditional headhunting business, which has been in the UAE for about the past 10 years. And then obviously the Work Crowd, which is a disruptive platform that connects businesses directly with freelancers. And I guess, over the years, I've spoken to lots of CEOs and talked about problems, and Roberto talked about problems. And one of the fundamental issues that businesses face for growth is talent. And cracking the talent issue is so important to any company, to any region. And, if I think about since when I first started headhunting to now, there has been a fundamental paradigm shift in the demand for talent. And that's come from both individuals and from companies. So individuals are wanting to work more flexibly. Women are going back to work post-maternity. They're looking for a better work-life balance. Digitalization, more skills are required. And from a client side, they're looking for greater flexibility. They need all these different skills, but they don't need them all the time. So this sort of concept of on-demand talent, where they can keep overheads down, but also get the skills when they need them, is really accelerating. And I think that's what's been fueling this freelance revolution. So we're seeing it from sort of two sides. And clearly, the UAE have jumped onto that, and the UAE is one of the fastest growing regions for freelancing, and with the introduction of the visas. I think that there are challenges that come into play, and it'd be good to think about those challenges, because suddenly you've got this decentralized workforce. So how do businesses find these individuals? How do they trust these individuals? And also, how do freelancers ensure they're getting paid and finding the work that they want to do? And I think, you know, it's great that we're moving in this direction, but there needs to be solutions for that. And essentially, that is why we launched the Work Crowd and why we're bringing it to the UAE, because I think, you know, the freelance community can provide a great source of talent to businesses, enable them to scale at pace. And what we're looking to do is connect regionally the freelancers so they can collect, they can collaborate, businesses can find them. We have technology that vets the freelancers and also trust indicators. So we take away that trust element. But I think this is also accelerated because of COVID. Now people are used to people working from home. You don't physically need to see someone in the office. So actually, I think McKinsey did an interesting stat that CEOs are 70% more likely to hire freelancers post-COVID. And globally, if we look at the stats, and these stats were done before COVID, by 2027, 50% of the workforce is going to be working independently. So if businesses aren't working out their strategy of finding freelancers, they need to start doing it, because they're going to have a core talent of permanent employees, absolutely, and I think that will always stay. But they're also going to have this flexible workforce around the edges that they can tap into. And ideally, they'll have it locally, but if that talent doesn't exist, they'll be able to go globally. And, you know, we're seeing a real rise in the use of platforms, and that's, you know, the Work Crowd is there, and we're building this global platform of talent, specifically in the marketing sectors. And I think that's where it's quite interesting, because historically, it was more sort of like the tech skills that were seen as contractors and freelancing, but that has shifted and continues to change. So we're getting writers, SEO individuals. It's the rise of the professional community, the individuals that say, do you know what, I want to work in a different way. And almost the higher the demand for the talent, the more likely it is suddenly to flip into a contracting way, because the power lies with the individual and not with the company. And they're realizing through means of technology like this, that they can start working in a different way and working globally with businesses. So it's a really exciting time, I think, for the UAE.
Thank you for that, Alice. And I know, Ross, when you and I had been talking before, one of the big things that you wanted to talk about today was the challenges of accessing flexible contingent workforce and what you described as this digital nomad. So what are you seeing currently now in your market when it comes to this contingent workforce and these digital nomads, and how would you normally access them?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I say, you know, I think in the UAE historically, it's been a very binary decision. You're either here or you're not. What's happened over the last year has opened the eyes to be able to be more flexible. But you know, I think the statistics suggest that by 2030, that over 1 billion people from the global workforce will be effectively a digital nomad, someone who can deliver their professional value regardless of the location in which they are in. And I think, you know, that absolutely has to be embraced. So I think this concept of multi-location careers is something that is going to have an impact on things much broader than people are considering. I mean, if you even look now in Dubai around what's happened with the real estate market over the last 3 to 4 months, it's a market that, you know, unquestionably has had a very slow burn over the last 4 years of coming off, but there's been a spike in the last 3 to 4 months again, as people realize that if they are able to work anywhere in the world and they're able to deliver the guts of what they do from anywhere, why not do that somewhere that's safe, somewhere that's got great weather, somewhere that's got 2/3 of the world's population within a 6-hour flight from there. So I think the business world is moving from a very hub and spoke model. And I say that as someone who had the misfortune to do 1,000 flights in the last 10 years. And you kind of become addicted to that becoming a way of working. I think, that degree of business travel, I struggle to see that returning, apart from a very, very select number of executives who have the requirement to do that. I do think, Felice, that we'll maybe start to see less of a hub and spoke model of that and more of a point-to-point model. People making a conscious decision to say, I'm going to spend 6 or 7 months of my life working in Dubai and maybe do the remainder of the year working elsewhere. Because there is a fine line between, having connectivity anywhere, but there also has to be that cultural connectivity. The people that are working on things need to understand the markets that they're serving. So yes, it's the concept of digital nomad sometimes sounds like someone in a hammock in Koh Samui with their laptop on their knees doing that. But I think actually a digital nomad, a professional digital nomad, is more likely to be someone that maybe is more point to point. And I think in the gig economy that we're now in, I look at the guys in our office now, our generation always wanted the security of owning a house. I think in a gig economy world, that's less important. But I think people will want to maybe have multiple bases that they can take themselves out of. And I think businesses need to get more comfortable with that themselves as well. And I think, then even from a people and talent perspective, having much more interesting ways of providing a benefits package that supports that type of living. So I do think there are, potentially some seismic changes coming in terms of how contingent workforces structure themselves. Not just from a freelance community perspective, which is absolutely vital, but also from a full-time employee perspective, looking at ways of supporting people to do things. Before I finish up, one of the things that we've been looking at as a business this year is, we're very conscious of the fact that people haven't seen family in 18 months. They just haven't had the chance to travel with multiple lockdowns around the world. And as things start to open up, this summer, we hope, one of the things we're suggesting to our people is to say, if you're taking 2 weeks off to go back home to India, to Johannesburg, to London, to Frankfurt, to Paris, take your 2 weeks of leave, but augment that with another 2 weeks of staying there to be around friends and family. And if you can find a way that works remotely with your clients and with your team, knock yourself out. You guys can figure this out and you're empowered to do that. But I think finding much more flexible ways of making sure that full-time employees have a degree of flexibility of what freelancers are looking for, there's a massive opportunity there. On the flip side then, people that are taking on freelancers, not doing that in the traditional way of saying, I'll pay you a day rate, it's a back-to-back agreement, you'll get paid when we get paid by the client. I think extending what would be traditional full-time benefits packages of full-time employees to that contingent ecosystem is also something that would be very interesting to look at.
And just on that point, Ross, and talking about the permanent staff, it's interesting. I think, if businesses now want to retain their top talent, they're going to have to offer more flexibility. It's sort of everyone's proven that they can work from home. And I do believe that it's important to have that face contact. And I think, businesses that are suddenly getting rid of their offices totally, we're noticing candidates coming to us and saying, actually, I do want to go to an office sometimes, just not all the time. And they're looking for that flexibility. So there's no reason now not to offer flexibility. And I think if businesses don't, then they're actually going to miss out on good talent. Likewise, on the values, that we're noticing individuals who perhaps haven't been looked after during lockdown and during these difficult times. People are suddenly saying, actually, I don't need to work there anymore. I can go and work in a different, for a different business anywhere in the world. Because those that are offering true flexibility, I can work for them. So suddenly choice has exploded. And on the freelance sort of benefits, I think absolutely, what other benefits can a freelancer be offered? Employee style benefits, ensuring that they're getting paid, and all those additional things.
And sorry, you touch base, this is great. And you touch base before on two concepts that I think are key. One, you mentioned before, trust. because the thing is, you have someone hired somewhere else. There are cultural differences. So how you build that sort of environment where you trust, right? So because at scale, it can be something difficult to manage if you don't have the right levers to pull. So trust, I think, is key. So on both sides, you as a freelancer, how you build your reputation and the trust in getting your services noticed and referred to, and so on and so forth, but also you as a company and as an organization, how you build trust by working with people that are not necessarily there with you, but all relates, in my opinion, to the second one, that is culture, because we see many times is, if the leadership at the top in the organization doesn't have or set the right culture in the organization, the risk is that all of this ends up being just as a routine or a business as usual, or and if you don't update your performance management of your employees, if you don't base the things not on effort but on outcome, on values, on value generated, how can you build that trust, right? So and I guess it all starts from the top with the behaviors that you said in the leadership team, and how you really empower your people to deliver on outcome, on value, and being heard even in a remote environment, which is far beyond just remote from home, working from home or from the offices, work from anywhere, but how you build that culture where people comes together as a team or as an organization because they are tied by the same purpose. The other consideration is this region at large is a region where you have countries with a very young population. And that's probably the real opportunity as well when we look at Middle East and Africa. So this young population comes, with this generation. I've lost the not the count, but the letter, right? Which generation is now Z, Alpha, Beta? But these young people comes, they give it for granted that organization comes with a sense of purpose, that they need to find this purpose in the brand and so on and so forth, right? So so the whole conversation about how you enable these people to join your organization in a virtual kind of set, or half virtual, half physical, how they can really be integrated, and how they can work together as a team. How you get them, their discretionary effort on top of retainers or contracts. So because that's what build the bonding, that's what build the real value, the impact. So that would be great to see how this is going to plan out also from this region.
It's funny, that whole trust element was one of the questions I've got written down for Alice, actually, because I know the trust is something that we lose in permanent roles. It's even more difficult when it's through with the freelancer side. So how does the work crowd overcome that, Alice? How do you enable the trust in these workforce that haven't been interviewed to the same level and odds? Where do you see that moving from here?
Yeah, I mean, trust is interesting. I guess historically people were worried about employees working from home. Were they getting up at 8 a.m. and starting the day and finishing at 6 or whatever time they were supposed to do? Now they have to stop worrying about that. You can't control something that you can't control. And but what you can do is look at different ways. Number one, trust them, but look at the outcome someone's doing rather than the time that they spend doing it or when they are doing it. And, certainly in the UK, parents have been challenged with having to do homeschooling. So they're having to do different hours. Some are getting up at 5 and finishing at 9 and then starting again in the evenings. So it's all about the outcomes. And I think, if in a freelance way, if you can pay people based on their outcomes rather than the time it takes them to do it, you could potentially have a much higher level individual doing that work much faster. But does that mean you pay them less? No, you pay them for the work that they do and the quality of the work that they're doing. But so that's sort of my overall thoughts on trust. But on the work crowd, there's also a trust of like, who is this person? Are they part of someone that I know? And usually when some people hire initially in a business, they might call up their mates or their colleagues they used to work with, and they pull them in because they trust those individuals. And so as a result, you end up with a team of people like you who've got similar sort of values and thinking. And is that good for growth and innovation? No, you want to actually get in different individuals with different experiences. And the freelance community is great at doing that. So what we want to do as a platform is take away that trust worry. So what we do is we vet all our freelancers before they come on the platform. So it's not just like a directory that you might find, say, LinkedIn or Fiverr, which are great platforms, but there is no vetting procedure to join. So for us, we know our success is going to be based on the quality of our community. So we want the best in class of individuals. There's also ability to rate. So if someone's done a good job, you can give them 5 out of 5, or 1 out of 5 if they haven't done a good job. And we can start monitoring that. And we only want to maintain the highest level of freelancers on the platform. So there's things like that we can include. Likewise, there's also references. So you can see directly the brands that these individuals have worked on and who they've worked with. So all those things help to remove the trust. And then we encourage the businesses to pay on outcomes rather than specific time. So what is the project? And then, make sure you have good communication. Work with your freelancers like they're your permanent employees. Don't just sort of let them go into the wilderness. Communicate, engage, and then you're building that trust along the way. And also make sure you have the right contractual relationships, as you would with a permanent employee. Have a contractual relationship with your freelancer.
Felice, if I may, maybe on that, Alice, because I think you make a very important point, and just picking up on some of the comments I see from Adam and David are picking up in what's here. Policy is something that is always referred to, and there's always, I think there's an expectation that the government needs to have the right policy in place to be able to, and the right framework to enable this to happen. I think the UAE has made enormous strides over the last 12 months with the variety of initiatives that you've outlined to make it easier for people to either be here or to work for companies that are here, which is great. But I think the responsibility for policy cannot be laid squarely at the door of the government. So I think companies and organizations have an obligation to be doing much more with their freelance communities in particular to try and make that better. There remains a dichotomy where the default commercial model of freelancers is to propose a day rate. The default commercial model for a company is that it's outcome driven for their client. And so there's a natural tension there where in a world of ambiguity and when things are fluid and when they change, you have a commercial construct that is banging heads against each other. I would be encouraging, and I do, to the freelancers working with us to be more creative in terms of the commercial model that's being proposed as well, to help create more consistency around that. So being more outcome driven and recognizing that things will move and that it's about outcome, not deliverable, is really important. And I think then to the point around company policy, one of the things that we've also looked to do is implement something called 2+U. So I think we recognize that there's a fatigue of being behind the screen 100% of the time. Some of our software engineers would be happy to do it in perpetuity. I think they don't mind, but for our creative teams, and our client teams, having that interaction with people is so important. I mean, the humanity of business is something that I do feel has been lost, and there's a fatigue around that. So we've introduced something called 2+U, which is an expectation that you'll spend 2 days in the office every week. That's not a fixed thing, but as a guide. And that's for team meetings, seeing clients, or being on client site, collaborative workshops, those safely, socially distanced interactions around the coffee machines and the water coolers, where there's that secret sauce of things that you can't get hold of. So that's the two. And then the U, we're leaving up to everyone else to say, look, you're all grown-ups. You can figure out what suits you. If you want to do this from a coffee shop or from home or from your spare bedroom, and knock yourselves out. But if you want to come in the full 5 days, you can do that as well. But I think we have to recognize that everyone does have very different needs, and whether it's dropping the kids off to school for the morning run, or whether it's some people wanting to escape their husband and get some time away from, 1,500 square feet of being locked up. I think, to the points that you've all made, having that flexibility of how people do things is incredibly important.
Quite amazing the impact we're all now living with after going through COVID. And as a region, we were very black and white, 9 to 5. I was going to say Monday to Friday, but Sunday to Thursday. And it's all just flipped so quickly. So I think what would be quite good now, Roberto, if we could just look at some of the initiatives that are here now, because there's quite a few questions coming through from the attendees talking about, the benefits, the trust from the government when it comes to payment. There's an interesting one as well that'd be quite good, that Ross and Roberto, your thoughts on it, talking about, where's it gone? IR35, Alice, would be a great one for you to discuss, but actually the economy here and the amount of people have lost their jobs, how are we protected? So maybe, Roberto, if we start first, some of the initiatives that are now there that are enabling people to work in the region, to stay here, to be a bit more protected.
Yeah, no, definitely. So definitely, as we said before, some of the measures that the government adopted are in line with, making it easier for people to establish here, whether it's remote workforce through remote visas, or people that can work as a freelance here, or people that can find an opportunity to stay here but finding another job. And then there have been announcements of longer term thinking from the golden visa for certain categories for now to citizenship. So there is an opening up which gives some hope, right? So at the same time, it's not just a matter of that, it's also a matter of skilling and making the market a bit more fluid and transparent when it comes to the job opportunities and how to identify those opportunities and move around from one company to the other. Here is where, for example, Microsoft, but not only Microsoft, I mean, big tech companies and other players for sure can play a big role here when it comes to skilling, which doesn't mean necessarily youth, which of course is a big focus for us, but also upskilling or reskilling people that maybe have been impacted more than other industries or sectors from the pandemic because of the industry they were in, but still reskilling, upskilling these people to find an opportunity elsewhere, right? So in adjacent sectors or in other companies. So for us, for me, for example, focusing on startups, it's great to see the initiatives that are put in place in the UAE to make it possible for entrepreneurs, for people that maybe were in corporates for a long time and they are considering, look, I want to build something myself. Would the UAE be the right place, or should I again move back to the UK or wherever else, right? So, and they're making it easier and easier for people to consider UAE as an option to start from, right? So all the initiatives where you can that are in the line of the ease of doing business in terms of simplifying or reducing the cost of setting up, and maybe also closing if things do not go well. So all those initiatives that have been rolled out, and there will be more rolling out in the coming months, are along the lines of making it easier for people to build from here. And what I see it happening is that the ecosystem is being created as we speak. So maybe it's still fragmented, but there are more players from government to academia to corporates to tech companies to accelerators to VCs, venture capital, that are putting together more and more initiatives to make it easier for people to relocate here. Think about what, for example, in the UAE, what Abu Dhabi is doing. The government in Abu Dhabi and the different players from Abu Dhabi Investment Office ADGM and the other players there, you know, the incentives, for example, that Hub 71 through Mubadala and Adio, they are giving to either small, medium businesses or startups to set up their entity in Abu Dhabi and build from here, considering Abu Dhabi as a regional hub for the broader Middle East and Africa region, is unbelievable, right? So it's raising the bar as well across the region, because think about it, you are a founder, you can subsidize and you can have incentives for housing, for health insurance and office space, and you can plug into a community of access to markets, access to corporates and service partners that are there to support. So this is amazing, because this ignite and de-risk at some point the decision of setting up a legal entity here, given that there are still some other high costs that you might incur into, but still you have an amount of incentives that make it definitely much easier, as it used to be a few years back, to set up a legal entity here, a startup here. And we see great startups that are now, you know, trying to tap into other markets and getting to more mature stages of growth from the region. So the maturity, as we said before, is increasing, but the opportunity starts from the ecosystem that is being built here to allow you know, the connectedness, to allow the ease of doing business, to allow to set up you know, the entity here and look at scaling it through the region. Now there are still a lot of roadblocks, right, and barriers when you think about Middle East and North Africa as a region. Actually, you have different countries. You think about, you are a fintech. You have different regulations in the UAE to comply with, and then you need to expand in other markets. So, but what we see is definitely the intention to constantly simplify and make it easier. And there are definitely incentives out there and initiatives that tap into entrepreneurship, for founders to make it easier for them to set up here.
Unmute myself. Right, so there's so much happening in this region now, isn't there? I mean, Ross, if we go back to you again, looking at future of business, where are you seeing with your client base? Obviously Roberta's talking about the startup world. What about the SME and the multinationals? Where are you seeing the developments in the region, and not just the UAE, but the wider GCC? What are your clients coming back with right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. Certainly, you know, I think the scale of some of the mega projects in this region is only going to increase. I think the importance of both physical and social infrastructure has become so important. And I think there's a couple of the comments in the chat here that maybe talk around some of this, which may give some context to it, Felice. I mean, I think one question around that Elvis has asked is, you know, do you see a desire to come back into the office? I'll be very honest with you. I vehemently disagree with the policy that a lot of the multinationals came out with on the back of COVID around the permanence of virtual working. My personal experience is that there is a desire for people to be coming back in to the office and having the ability to interact with people, but I think there has to be flexibility around that. I think by suggesting that workforces of tens of thousands of people can remain virtual forever is just replacing one problem with another. I think some organizations that have said they're selling all of their real estate and they're moving to that model will lose the very essence of what it is that defines them. So, you know, my view very much is that there has to be something of a hybrid model there where you can get the value, the human touch and value with the flexibility around that. Lloyd's asked a question around what education needs to be doing around this as well. And, you know, given perhaps some of my experiences in education, I think, you know, when I see the high school graduates and the university graduates coming through now, there being an aspect of people being comfortable with ambiguity is not something that has been drilled into people. People's degrees and they're set up to going into careers. Our children will live comfortably until they're 120 years old. They're not going to have one career. they're going to be reskilling and retooling all the time. So having the ability of people to do that, I think, will naturally create a much greater freelance or digital nomad community out there. But I think education has to do a much better job of around financial literacy and better commercial focus, so that people understand their value and how they can drive that. You know, a yearly salary is a terrible benchmark for happiness and success. I know that sounds like a very vaporous statement, but if it all boils down to day rates and, you know, what people are getting at the end of each month, it becomes difficult to break that cycle. And the last point, Felice, that I'd make on that is, you know, I think the UAE in particular is becoming, or the GCC rather, is becoming much less transient than it used to be. 10 years ago, this used to be a place, or 15 years ago, that people came for a 2-year placement. I myself came on a 2-year secondment with one of the big 4 out here. 10 years later, I'm still here. But there's a level of permanence now where the country also has an incredible wealth of untapped talent. I see so many people who have had families that have meant that their ability to have a full-time job is restricted now. But there's an incredible wealth of talent and experience that's being completely unutilized because the model is not set up to support them. And from a gender perspective, I think companies themselves have an obligation to be positively fixing that much more effectively and not waiting for a government policy to do that. I think it's incumbent on all of us to be finding mechanisms to engage great talent in the workforce that maybe doesn't have 40 hours in a week to give, but those 10 hours or those 20 hours of what they can give around kids, around schooling is vitally important.
If I could jump in there, Ross, I totally agree with everything you just said, and I wish I'd heard it before I had to give my son some career advice at the weekend. He was quizzing me on what he should do for the rest of his life, and how he could buy his first car by the time he hit the age of 21. So, but just on, there's a couple of questions on IR 35 that have come through. If anyone wants to drop me an email, I can send them a really good seminar that we ran on it, which explains all about IR 35. My email address is alice@theworkcrowd.com. More than happy to share that. But essentially, if you are, I mean, there are rules, and the underlying rule, the more control that you have rather than the employer has, that's the sort of basis of the rule. So if you're using your own equipment, working in your own time, have multiple projects that you're working on, then you're very much more likely to fall within the rules. So there's some sort of basic principles. Obviously, it is much more detailed than that, and I'm more than happy to sort of share a slide on that. I think there was also a question for me on how to stand out, especially after COVID times, against competition. You know, freelancers have had a tough time when budgets were cut mid last year. We've seen a real rise in projects coming back. So, you know, there is definitely much more positivity in the market, but you do need to stand out. And I think it's making sure you have good creds, good references, networking, collaborate with other freelancers. We have a tool on the platform, and often freelancers are looking for work and then they win work which is beyond their skill set, so they pull in other freelancers. So collaboration and build your own ecosystem of individuals to work with is a great source of finding other work. So, you know, when we're all allowed to do live events and live networking, get out there and do live networking. We will be implementing a tool for freelancers to actually network as well on the Work Crowd, but it's really important to build up that network of individuals.
And if I may chime in, these are all great considerations, Ross and Alice. I've seen some comments as well on people that are divided into, yeah, I will never go back in the office because it was distracting, I will go back. I think the mindset, in my opinion, maybe I represent the startups here, so, you know, I'm biased with a lot of founders that are trying to break the rules. But in my opinion, the mindset should be different, right? So shouldn't just be responding or recovering from something that, okay, fair enough, there have been people impacted, so for sure. But there should be also a phase of reimagining, right? So At the end of the day, when I was at Google in 2009, I could work from home. I had that flexibility. Why? Because the organization was flat. I was not measured on effort. And I could do whatever I wanted as long as I was returning good results, and was amazing. I could choose. I was not forced to work from home. Now I can tell you, working from home, our office is still closed at Microsoft for now here. It's not nice because you are in these back-to-back meetings. You don't tell them why people book meetings 30 minutes or 1 hour all the time. Why don't we do walking meetings? Why don't we meet at, so I would say there should be this concept of working from home, working from office, remote work. I don't buy into that. I think the mindset should be different from the top, from the culture of the organization, and say, what is it you want to achieve, and adapt to the situation. Meaning, with my team, we had to do a brainstorming. It's annoying, do it over a VC? Yeah. So we met somewhere and we did a brainstorming over a whiteboard, wherever we found a place, to do that. Who cares? But we came together because that human interaction, when you set the strategy and you had to discuss, back and forth, and you cannot replace that with Teams or Zoom or whatever. You still need that human interaction. And maybe, people are productive at a certain time of the day. So if you are productive during the night or not, depending, of course, what type of job, right? So I believe there is no right or wrong answer. It's more the mindset that is not there, and the actions doesn't cope with the words of a lot of organizations that they say, yes, we are doing this, but then the way you measure people and the way you build that diversity is not following those words. Most organizations, the diversity thing is still unfortunately reduced to gender. But what about this diversity of experience of people with different backgrounds that can really bring diversity of thinking into the process that you have, into what you're doing, right? So it should be much broader than how organizations are reducing it today. So it's all, in my opinion, it's all a matter of also leadership that in most organizations is lacking to understand, how to adapt or how to shift, how to make the change in the organization, and culture. Because if you don't have those behaviors that you yourself as a leader, you live by yourself, then who is going to follow you if you're not going there to practicing what you preach? So in my opinion, it's also a matter of mindset and culture and leadership that needs to really be held accountable, because the new generation, the reality is, they are rebels, right? So they are not driven by the same things that other generations before were driven. So this change is going to happen. It's a matter of you as an organization, how you want to adapt, and how you want to look ahead of time, really think long term, and adapt to things and do things differently. Because there are many things that we keep doing today that if you stop thinking why we are doing the things the same way we were doing a few years back, there is no reason why, right? So it's just a routine or sort of an inertia. But we need that energy coming in to question the system and change things, and that's positive. So I think it's also a matter of leadership and culture, as we said before.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end our webinar, actually. Let's all impact from ourselves and from the leaders. It's been really great. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. There have been quite a lot of questions coming through. If you do have more questions, please do email me. I will try and respond with as many as we can. There are a few things on there as well that I will try and respond after the event. But my email is feliceh@hansonsearch.com. We're more than happy to answer as many questions as we can. As I said, this has been recorded. We will send out an overview in the next few days, and we will send out a recording as well. But thank you so much, panelists. It's really, there's so much more we could have talked about, and I think there's so many more conversations to be had. Hope you've all enjoyed the webinar today, and see you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.